We're at stand 5 of the Mac Lake staff ride, and after Jim Swiderski and his dozer were burned over, the fire continued advancing on the subdivision at an average rate of spread of over 2 miles an hour. The fire had flame lengths of 40 to 60 feet and was a fully developed crown fire, and it was spotting at least a quarter mile in advance of itself. So as the fire reached the western edge of the subdivision, what we're standing in right now is a fuel break. These fuel breaks were not here back in 1980, so the fire was able to run through Jack Pine right to the edge of the subdivision at that point, and structure protection was ineffective due to the intensity of the fire, so firefighting resources and citizens were all evacuated from the subdivision. There were no further lives lost. One citizen was injured trying to get closer to the fire to see what was happening. But the net result was the fire burned through the subdivision. It's 1.5 miles long. The fire burned through the subdivision in 15 minutes. So the fire was moving at a rate of spread of over 6 miles an hour. We lost 44 structures, some homes, some outbuildings, as the fire burned through the subdivision. So at 13:15, the fire hit the subdivision, and by 13:30, the fire had burned all the way through it. Once the fire had passed, firefighting resources were able to come into the subdivision again and try to defend all the structures and prevent any more from burning down. So they were very successful once they came back in to protect what structures were left, which there were many. So once the fire had passed the subdivision, it ran with the west wind for averaging several miles an hour until the cold front passed. Once that cold front passed, the wind switched to the northwest. So now you had a flame front that was many miles long, and you had a northwest wind pushing a whole flank of the fire out. The net result of that was by the end of the afternoon, the fire had burned 24,000 acres in one run. It had emitted the energy of 8 to 9 Hiroshima bombs. It had a pyrocumulus cloud on it that produced rain and lightning 60 miles away in the town of Oscoda, which is on the Lake Huron shore. So some pretty amazing fire behavior for this type of fuel, but it's also normal for Jack Pine fuel type. So some of the lessons learned from the 1980 Mac Lake fire, if you have a burn plan, follow the plan. There were many different things that accumulated to cause the problems that the crews had on the Crane Lake prescribed fire. And so that was one of the things that was a lesson learned. Don't let little problems accumulate. If you see a small problem on your fire or prescribed fire, you want to address it as soon as possible. Otherwise, it'll accumulate with other things. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So they only had 11 people on their prescribed fire, and things progressed so quickly, they didn't get enough help in time. So time is really important and maybe the most valuable resource. Another lesson learned was stay in communication with adjoining forces. The dozer and the engine, they weren't in good communication, and they had lost their spotter. So there wasn't good commo between one unit who retreated from the fire and the other unit who couldn't get away from the fire quick enough. Escape routes and safety zones. Again, in this subdivision, there were no fuel breaks, so they had to evacuate people completely out to protect them. And then one of the big ones, which we'll talk about here in just a minute, is make sure you have fuel breaks on the things that you want to protect. Homes, property, any other type of infrastructure. The only thing that can really save those types of resources from a Jack Pine crown fire is a fuel break that's several hundred feet wide, so that you have enough room for both resources to fight fire and or be able to shelter in place if the fire overruns them. And of course, Jim didn't have that. He was in the middle of the Jack Pine forest. There really wasn't a safe place for him to take refuge when he was fighting that fire. The other lesson learned is work with your property owners. The home behind us survived the 1980 Mac Lake fire. It's built out of material called Permalog. It's a concrete type of siding material. The home next to it did not survive that 1980 fire. But the big lesson is work with the homeowners in these subdivisions. If you have a fuel break, the next step is work with them to really get their property cleaned up So it's not a fire hazard for folks protecting the subdivision.